Hi, my name is Katie Stewart. I am a student at Hannibal LaGrange University, and I am doing an article review today by Wendy S. Bray and Luz A. Maldonado, and it's called Fostering Fact Fluency with Number String Discussions. I was so excited to read this article because that's something that I've really tried to be more intentional about in my classroom for the last 2 years is really effective number talks and discussions and how we can use those as huge teaching moments with our students. And so this article just really shed a light on some things that I'm already doing with my discussions in math, but also some things that I really need to step my game up on. So let's just dive right into it. Um, it talks about how a structured series or string of basic fact problems can be an opportunity for students to collaborate and explore relationships with one another through the use of mathematical strategies. And boy, how different that is than the approach that I feel like our educators took when I was a student in the K-12 classroom. It was not like that at all. I just remember standard algorithm, mad minutes, things like that. It was, for some reason, it was important to be quick. Um, and I'm not saying that that's not a good thing to kind of have in your pocket, but it doesn't really reflect a true understanding or it doesn't really reflect true number sense. And so this article really talks about how it's no longer just about memorizing isolated facts by rote through repetition. It's about really understanding the value of numbers. So it's not just knowing that 4 times 4 is 16. It's about understanding why 4 times 4 is 16. And so it talks about how using these strings during our discussions, it supports students in exploring flexible, strategic, and efficient ways to solve math problems. And as students do start to become familiar with those facts, like 4 times 4 and how that does equal a product of 16, we can encourage them to use that information to consider, well, how can I connect that information to what I don't already know? And so as I was reading this in the article, I just, started jotting down some different things that, I thought that it was talking about. And this is kind of what I came up with. Now, excuse my really fancy notebook paper, but this is what I came up with. And this is just very similar to what I would already be incorporating in a number talk in my classroom at this point in the year. Actually, starting tomorrow, we are going to be starting multiplication strategies. We've been doing 3-digit addition and subtraction for the last 2 weeks, and now we are finally ready to start the multiplication unit in our math class. And so this is just kind of what I would probably incorporate in my number talk using these points or using this advice that's given by the authors of the article in, using those basic facts to help us connect the known information to the unknown. And so I would take 3 times 1, put that on the board, give students about 30 seconds to strategize, thumbs on the chest for a strategy. If students agree with one another, they, do this symbol in my class. If they disagree, they do a thumbs down. And so we would just dive right into it. And so 3 times 1, okay, you might call on a student. Oh, I know that 3 times 1 equals 3. And, give some other students a chance to agree. And then I would say, well, how can I use 3 times 1 to help me solve 3 times 10? And this is where, those strategies start to come out. Some students might say, oh, I know that 3 times 1 equals 3. We just solved that problem. I also know that 3 times 1 equals 3, and all I need to do is add that 0 to the end. So 3 times 10 must equal 30. Yes, that is a strategy, and one that I would be very likely to hear during a number talk in my classroom. Other students might strategize by saying, I can count by 10 3 times. 10 plus 10 plus 10 equals 30. So, you've got some repeated addition. And then you move on, to 3 times 50. What do I know about 3 times 50? Some students might say, oh, I know 3 times 5 equals 15. So what do you do with that 0 on the end? You add the 0 to the end of 15 to get 150. Or some students, again, they may count by 50 3 times, 50, 100, 150. And then I would say, okay, now this is our last problem here. How can I use what I already know about these first 3 problems to help me solve 3 times 100? And, you know, it's one of those problems that is probably, it looks very daunting to students when, you first put this on the board. But by the end of the discussion, it's like, oh, that was so easy. And then the next thing you know, your number talks look like, I don't know, 350 times 399 or something crazy like that. But this is just a great way to use this idea that the article talks about, using what we already know to help us solve unknown equations. And, that's just super important, I think, in any curriculum area. So how can we use a number string in a number talk effectively? First of all, it's about strategically selecting problems that are sequenced to provoke that really thoughtful discussion. So, you wouldn't just include a bunch of math problems that are going to be really, really difficult for your students to make any sort of connection. You would want to incorporate some things that your students are already familiar with. And, students start to reason with one another, and they start to identify or clarify relationships with one another. And I think it's just super important, when you're designing a number talk, using these strings, that you have a student's current level of understanding at the forefront, just like the article mentions. The student understanding has to be first and foremost in any sort of number talk planning. Otherwise, it's just a lost cause. The authors also talk about the importance of familiarizing yourself with your students and, kind of starting to predict how certain students would answer questions. And you start to really pick out the students who are going to share some really insightful strategies. And then, they're teaching the lesson probably better than you could teach it. For some reason, 8-year-olds learn better when another 8-year-old is teaching them sometimes. I don't know why. They're teaching them the same thing that maybe I was planning on teaching them. But, they're learning from one another. And that's just, that's an example of you taking more of a facilitation role and letting the students just kind of take ownership of their learning. And so that's just kind of where we have shifted in the world of education. And I think that's amazing. But you start to strategically call on those students to share their ideas. And, if you know that a student is really good at using, let's say, a decomposing strategy where they have a 3-digit number and they decompose it into smaller parts to solve. If a student does that really well, you would maybe call on that student for the first 3 or 4 days to share that strategy. And then the next thing you know, you've got 3 or 4 other students who are using that same strategy. And the article talks about an observation that the authors did where they observed a second grade classroom, and that is exactly what was taking place. They noticed that a teacher was calling on 1 or 2 specific students while they were going over, I think it was an addition unit. And they just noticed that by the end of the week, other students were fostering those same strategies that the other 2 were using all week long. And so I think that that's super important. And that is something that I definitely need to be more mindful of in my discussions. I do it some, but probably not as often as I should. It can be a bit of a challenge bringing every student in the classroom into the discussion. You've always got those couple of students who just kind of want to, hide in the background. They don't want to be noticed. They just want to sit there and, untie their shoestrings or whatever. But you want to be, very careful about how you respond to students who are less likely to, share their strategies, or students who have maybe shared a strategy who got an incorrect answer, things like that. You always want to highlight the things that they are doing right and, really just work to give them the praise that they need to continue on and to keep sharing their thoughts and ideas with their classmates. But at the end of the day, using strings in a number talk is just a really great opportunity for students to establish a strong foundation for using number relationships. And, it's not about just knowing that 5 times 5 is 25. It's about breaking it down and understanding what the value of 5 is, what the meaning of that digit is, and just building a really strong math foundation from there. And honestly, it's a really good way to just honor those students' thoughts and ideas and strategies that do kind of veer off the beaten path. It can be a little scary at first, but I think once you establish the guidelines and your students understand that they are strategizing with one another in a really safe space, and we're all learning from one another, I think that that's when amazing things start to happen. And as I was reading this, I was trying to think of something biblical that I could really tie in to this review, and I was just reminded of a verse in Proverbs. It's Proverbs 11:25, I believe, and it talks about how a generous person will prosper, and one who refreshes others will be refreshed. And I thought about my group of third graders, and I thought about how big of a blessing it is to see my students learning from me, but also learning from one another. And I think that when all those little third graders are sitting at my carpet and they're connecting ideas, and one student is sharing their thoughts, and then you start hearing oh, I get it now. That is just, it's so refreshing. And it's also so refreshing, to think about how much we can learn from our students during this time. And it's just a really good opportunity for you to get to know your students better, and for you to understand the way that they solve problems and the strategies that they use to solve problems. And honestly, I cannot tell you how many times I have learned from my students, and I teach intensive math in third grade. So these students really need the extra help. But they have taught me so many things about solving multiplication problems that I never even considered. And so I just think that is the most awesome thing. And I love that this article really just sheds a light on how important it is to allow our students the opportunities to share their thoughts with one another and with their teachers. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.